This is Cameron McEwen and Bob Dobbs once again for the 35th episode of our survey of my explanation of Trump and the tech body. And if you have a copy of it, this long essay, you'd go to page 29, where after we have a long quote from Jean Baudrillard on the precession of simulacra, I make a response to a person who interviewed me about the quote. So I say, put in McLuhan terms, Jean Baudrillard is talking about visual space, which creates a fragmented, and visual spaces in quotes, which creates a fragmented print-defined separation between words. If someone is talking to you, they're slurring and blabbing away, no punctuation. But when you start punctuating and separating words into grammar based on visual book rules, that is a situation that leads to moral hypothesis and separations between ideas. Down in the fourth paragraph, quote, the whole traditional mode of causality. That's a quote from Baudrillard. So then I say, remember, literacy brings in causality. And I'm speaking orally to somebody who's asked me a question. Remember, literacy brings in causality. And it's being brought into question by the new situation. Not the electric environment, but later technology, basically genetic and computer patterning, medicine, chemistry, analyzing DNA models. That's the new world of post-literate, post-fragmented simulation. Simulation is Baudrillard's term. He's reading scientific journals and using their terms, whereas McLuhan used his own terms to talk about the new, capital N-E-W. Look at the list, quote, the whole traditional mode. Look at the divisions, quote, the active critical mode, the analytical mode, which actually thinks in terms of causality. There are determining molecules, and there's a perspective. It's all visual space as McLuhan defines it. However,
right, but remember that, as you yourself have often pointed out, it wasn't McLuhan's aim to destroy visual space or destroy books. His intent was to recapture what was valuable in visual space and books, but he thought that that could only be done by coming to terms with all media, including the newest media.
That's well said. That's perfect. Yes, I mean, he has a statement in the 50s. What role is there today in the TV era for the book? And he felt that Joyce's Spinning's Wake had figured out how to present the book. So he translated Finnegans Wake, applied it, he said, and he did it in any media he could engage, but when he did books, they were specifically designed a certain way, with comprehensive awareness of the effects of a book as implied in Finnegans Wake. So McLuhan wrote a book totally differently than anybody else, I think. It was as he said, it was all about effects. The effects were supreme in his mind. Just the effect of giving you something to look at in a world which was hard to see. In actual ground effects, it's a tactile world. So he said, we've got to retrieve visual space or we ain't going to have any religion. No more Christianity. No more ethics.
Sure.
So,
no more personal identity.
Right. So you have to find a way to stick something in people's faces that they'd be forced to look at, and not a imposition, a domineering effect, but to say, look at this situation. You can't read this book. Well, actually, there is sense to be made in it. If you knew how to circle around behind it, sneak up on the book, look at it backwards, put it in the mirror, then you'd have something to look at. And
I agree with all that. That's good. Well said.
Yeah, and if you get people in a group, a Finnegans Wake reading group, with no stupid pretensions about anything about the book, you just look at it and start talking in its own terms, and it's always useful to repeat what McLuhan said. This is not a book, it's a It's a radio program. What? The book, sir? It's not a radio. Oh no, it's a radio program. And then you begin with that tension, with that statement. But I find I've been in many Phineas Wake groups, and people, once they get a little used to it, they like it. It's playful. They almost become obsessed with it. They look forward to their monthly meetings or every 2 weeks. They like especially in a group, the interaction with it and all that it represents, and it evokes so much memories and knowledge from people. You know, as people grope around, they start scraping their own knowledge base and coming up with suggestions and associations. So they pretty neat inventory, and I don't know if Joyce meant it that way at all. You know, did he mean, okay, this is going to cause groups to form to read the book together? We don't have any statements by him showing that. But it's a case where the audience takes over the art form. This is what Duchamp said. After 30 years, the artist is not involved in the art form or the artifact that was made. The audience put it to their own purposes.
Yeah.
So
that's what McLuhan called putting on.
Yeah. So, but McLuhan took the message of the Wake as he saw it and applied it and said, we have a new kind of ecology here. We have a warning, a warning that we need to take seriously, to the point, well, this television environment has to be turned off for a few months. It's interesting that nobody even saw that's what he was saying. They didn't read his stuff enough to get to that point. They all talk about the Playboy interview, if they even read that, and they don't take his modulating the media seriously. I don't think you take it seriously in certain moods. But I think
I take it seriously, but I take it seriously in a different way from what you do. You take it in a kind of literal way.
Yeah.
And I say no. It's to be taken in a scientific or metaphorical way. But just to comment on people not reading McLuhan, I mean, when he became a celebrity in 1965 or so, he had written an absolute ton of stuff, mostly in essay form. And none of that was read by, more than, let's say, 100 people in the world had read much of that. And that was mostly professors of English or professors of education or something like this. So there's a great mass of stuff that McLuhan had written between 1935 and 1965. That's 3 decades, which was then and remains today virtually unknown.
Yes. And he actually revitalized how to look at the history of literature. He made literature interesting. The way he would discuss the ground to William Blake or the ground to Charles Dickens or to Ben Jonson. He commented on everything, or all the main dots of the canon. He eventually got it all talked about, and it made, for me, it was a new way to revitalize my interest in history of literature.
Right. And unfortunately, it's been very little taken up.
Yeah.
The history of literature nowadays is mostly studied as something that old, stupid people were saying that we understand their issues much better than they did. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's a sort of hyper Gutenbergian consumer perspective on literature where the reader is the be and end all, instead of the opposite way, where literature should cause the reader to be put into question.
Right. Now, here's a statement. He says that sociology and psychology were the last gasp of the Gutenberg galaxy, the last innovations in books. And so what you have after they are normal in the college curriculum, people generally took sociology and psychology and applied it to the history of literature. They took the last genre, which then evaporated into self-help books by the 70s. But anyway, sociology and psychology is what people thought literature was for, to change, engineer society sociologically, and to help people's psychology, as it was perceived to be inadequate, like you just said. The older people, they didn't understand society, they didn't understand sociology, they didn't understand psychology. So at the end of the Gutenberg galaxy, the final innovations, sociology, psychology, and maybe even anthropology, was reflected back on the history of literature as,
right, but
as the latest medium, the mirror. You go ahead.
Right. Yeah, well, they were reflected back, but they were reflected back poorly.
Yeah.
So for McLuhan, sociology, psychology, and especially anthropology introduce questions about human being that we need to keep in mind when we're reading literature, because these the writers over the last 2,000 or 2,500 years weren't stupid. They were very intelligent people who, if they're approached questionably, can inform us about great issues.
Yeah, like to project that they were racist or class biased, sexist. I mean, sex as an issue didn't even happen until the printing press, according to McLuhan. You know what I mean? To be separated out of life.
Because of tactility being forgotten.
Tactility what?
The forgetting of tactility.
Yeah. And, I heard people saying in the collapse of Afghanistan last week, somebody was mocking one of these talking heads, the silly people, the NGO people who went over there and told the Afghani women that they've got to take gender studies and they got to find out they're victims of patriarchy or something. And this person was saying they didn't see the patriarchy as a problem because they didn't live with those issues. They had to survive. They lived in, well, you probably say a village situation where those divisions weren't important.
Yeah. So the people that were doing that kind of educating, you could say, got millions or billions of dollars out of the government.
Yeah.
And that was supposedly for Afghani reconstruction. But really it just was a reconstruction of people's bank accounts who were opening their lips about all this sort of stuff. And by the way, it turns out that this guy that we were talking about last week, Bulwer Lytton, his nephew, I believe it was, or it might even have been his son, was the Viceroy of India.
Wow.
And was the guy that declared war on Afghanistan in what was called the Second English-Afghani War. And the British invaded Afghanistan under this guy's command and destroyed that Afghani society, imposed their own supreme leader, and sort of left a destroyed society in their wake.
Do you remember the movie, the two men who would be kings or something? James Bond or Sean Connery and some of the guys, it's about that period. They go into Afghanistan in the 19th century, and they try to, I don't know, become something in there. Right? They become Afghanis. Do you know that movie?
I don't. I know the title, and I can see some sort of ad for Sean Connery.
Yeah.
But I never saw the movie, no.
Okay. But I think it was based on a novel or a book.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
But isn't that about that period? I think
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. I don't know. I just know that what the Americans have done for 20 years is basically a replay of what the British did over and over again in the 19th century.
Which, in a way, is all that a visually biased culture can do, or a visually kinetic culture. Spread their caste system horizontally across space, become a space-bound society or empire. They got to. McLuhan said the Chinese will have to do that, which they are now doing. They'll have to become a 19th century empire. It's all you can do with industrial management. You know what I'm saying there? You getting it?
I understand the words that you're using, but it seems to me that McLuhan saw that kind of industrial management was a disaster.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But it's a law. A society who builds himself up industrially goes into that empire mode automatically at some point. They only know how to spread out horizontally, visually, with a bureaucracy. The empire dynamic is a product of visual space.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. What I'm not sure about is if he saw it as inevitable, and especially I'm not sure that he saw that as what might be called the Asian model. Right?
Well, he did say that. He did say that the Chinese they're just hankering to have a 19th century. He even said something.
Oh, definitely he said that. He definitely said that Asians were a kind of an advanced civilization that wanted to be an underdeveloped civilization. Right? Yeah. They wanted to go backwards. They wanted to go back to the book. They wanted to get rid of their scripts and go to the Latin alphabet and all this sort of stuff. So, that's certainly true. While the West is orientalizing, the Orient is westernizing.
Yeah.
So I agree that he said all that sort of stuff, but did he think that that was sort of inevitable and that was how the Chinese would organize organize themselves? I'm not so sure about that because
he said they would. He said in 20 years we'll see. He was right. He said that. He knew what China was going to do, and China did do it. They're trying to do it now. They're trying to be a global British Empire.
Well, that the Chinese have a very, very old civilization, and they have maintained it by allowing different kinds of people to be different kinds of people.
Yeah.
So in China, it's not the case that everybody speaks the same language and understands the same language. So it was possible for the Chinese to export their culture to Vietnam and to Korea and to Japan without imposing the Chinese language. Right? They all of those cultures formerly, and Japan still, used the Chinese characters to write their language, but they were all different languages.
Yeah.
So that idea of organization is very interesting, right? It's a type of organization that allows internal difference. And,
right, but they become panicky under the extension of the tactile global theater. Every culture yearns to be its opposite. So, yeah, East goes west, west goes east. Men want to be women, women want to be men, children want to be adults, adults want to be children. You can apply it across the board.
Yeah, I agree that's what could you say? That's the kinetics.
Yes.
That McLuhan saw, but he didn't. I don't think he saw inevitability to that. Inevitability is a kind of mechanism. It's a kind of Gutenbergian insight, isn't it?
Yes, and the laws of media have that aspect, maybe not only that aspect, but they have that aspect of it's a determinism that people create because they don't want to see what's going on. A law is a determinism.
I guess, I mean, I would agree that people and nations can impose a certain determinism on themselves, or they can accept a determination from other people. But none of this is necessary.
No, I'm not saying it's necessary, but it's inevitable if you don't know what you haven't applied Joyce. You haven't mastered Finnegan's Wake, which is not.
Yeah. Okay. Or the rewriting of Finnegan's Wake.
Yes. Okay. So I looked up The Man Who Would Be King, a film, 1975, based on a Rudyard Kipling novella of the same name, and it says the film follows two rogue ex-soldiers. Okay, normal Western literate billiard balls. Former non-commissioned officers in the British Army who set off from late 19th century British India in search of adventure, kinetic movement, and end up in faraway Kafiristan, where one is taken for a god and made their king. What is this? The plot. In 1885 in India, while working late at night in his newspaper office, the journalist Rudyard Kipling is approached by a ragged, seemingly crazed derelict who reveals himself to be Peachy Carnahan, an old acquaintance. Carnahan tells Kipling the story of how he and his comrade in arms, Danny Dravatt, ex-sergeants of the British Army who had become adventurers, traveled far beyond India into the remote land of Kafiristan. 3 years earlier, Dravatt and Carnahan had met Kipling under less than auspicious circumstances. After stealing Kipling's pocket watch, Carnahan found a Masonic tag on the chain and, realizing he had robbed a fellow Freemason, felt he had to return it. At the time, he and Dravatt were working on a plot to blackmail a local Rajah, which Kipling foiled by getting the British District Commissioner to intervene. In a comic relief turn, Carnahan obliquely blackmails the commissioner in order to avoid deportation. Now they're saying this is the plot, but it sounds like the actual events that happened.
Well, except that the actual events were imposed through war, through extreme violence.
Yeah. Well, it says, frustrated at the lack of opportunities for lucrative criminal mischief, in an India becoming more civilized and regulated, partly through their own hard efforts as soldiers, and with little to look forward to in the United Kingdom except dreary, poorly paid jobs, the two turn up at Kipling's office with an audacious plan. Forsaking India, they will head with 20 rifles and ammunition to Kafiristan, a country virtually unknown to Europeans since its conquest by Alexander the Great. There they will offer their services to a ruler and then help him to conquer his neighbors, but proceed to overthrow him and loot the country. Kipling, at first trying to dissuade them, gives Dravatt his Masonic tag as a token of brotherhood. Is this the novel? I don't understand. After signing a contract pledging mutual loyalty and forswearing women and drink, the two set off on an epic overland journey north beyond the Khyber Pass. Over the next few weeks, they travel through Afghanistan, fighting off bandits, blizzards, and avalanches as they make their way into the unknown land of Kafiristan. They chance upon a Gurkha soldier, Billy Fish, the sole survivor of a years past British expedition. Speaking English as well as the local language, Billy smooths their way as they begin their rise, first offering their services to the chief of a much-raided village. When a force has been trained in modern weapons and tactics, they lead it out against some hated neighbors. During the battle, an arrow pierces Dravel's jacket, but he is unharmed. Both sides take him to be a god, though in fact the arrowhead was stopped by his leather bandolier. So it goes on, and they rise up. So it's a comedy, but it's a metaphor for what the West does to the East in the 19th century. Now the East is doing it back to us. What if China stole the election and put in Biden and got him to collapse Afghanistan? Boy, that'd be an amazing reversal, right?
Well, I don't think that the Chinese needed to cause anything in Afghanistan.
Say it again. You don't think?
I don't think the Chinese needed to do much in Afghanistan to bring about the debacle. The debacle was built into the whole American idea of what they were going to do.
Right. And you see, why do Americans repeat these mistakes? You know, the last 70 years, because that's the satire of McLuhan. You are a visually biased people with a kinetic aspect thrown in, and you will act out your destiny, your limitation, your medium, your effect, regardless, as long as you remain within a relatively simple visual kinetic culture, or what they call a military-industrial complex. But on top of that, McLuhan said, there's an opening here with the electronic chaos coming in, that maybe all these modalities will, or laws will be limited faster. People will see their mistakes faster, and a kind of collective awakening happens. And you do see awakening, or people claiming that people are waking up, all over the place today in different cultures, but nobody knows where to go from there. Okay, we woke up, now what? And that's where they don't want to really look at this kind of super angelic effect that has happened to everybody. They're off the planet. Gone somewhere, what is it? Gone fishing.
Well, I agree that people are baffled, to use a frequent McLuhan word.
Yeah.
Whether they should be looking for an answer off the planet, that's another whole question.
Well, they are the moon dreams, the Star Trek stuff, but off the planet means discarnate, lost in tactile, virtual spaces. Okay, taking what I said, let's see if it fits in what I'm saying here. So I go, it's all visual space as McLuhan defines it. Then they go, however, in the new situation, the distinctions between these scientific print-created categories, cause and effect, active and passive, subject and object, ends and means, all these dialectics. And then it is in this mode, and now I'm quoting Baudrillard, it is in this mode that it could be said, in the old way of visually biased people, TV watches us, TV alienates us, TV manipulates us, TV informs us, and that leads to the paranoia of the electronic man, because they're putting a literate, fragmented view on a different kind of process that's going on that people don't see. And then I quote Baudrillard, throughout all this, one is dependent on the analytical or visual space conception. I add that, the visual space conception. Then Baudrillard says, whose vanishing point is the horizon between reality and meaning, unquote. Then I say the vanishing point was created by literacy, that's perspective, the artistic renaissance in Florence. And then I quote Baudrillard, the horizon between reality and meaning, literate people ask, well, what's real and what's meaningful, unquote. You've got these dialectics, these splits. Baudrillard's inventorying the splits, and he's going to say, quote, none of this applies to where we are today, which is what I just said, and that's totally McLuhan. Oh, I jumped ahead. And that's totally McLuhan. McLuhan is saying the same thing, but McLuhan is talking in the 50s and 60s, like the very first quote I offered. And Baudrillard, a younger academic in Paris, is reading science, and he's looking at the technology of genetic engineering on its own terms and seeing how it's different. Now, back to the top. the famous book on the spectacle by Guy Debord, one of the Situationists, whose newsletter in the late 60s Baudrillard had edited for the semi-beatnik guys running around doing the May 68 rebellion and other artistic performance art. They were called Situationists. That whole thing that they were looking at and objecting to, what they were looking at was society as a movie or television spectacle, was not relevant to the late 70s when the quotation above by Baudrillard is being written. Guy Debord is obsolete. Then I go into the first reality TV show. Don't know if I want to go into that. And then I say...
Yeah, we've talked about that. That's the Louds again.
Yeah, we don't need to do that. So then I say, after talking about the Louds, Baudrillard is pointing out that if you look at a medium, and he's talking about a medium as a figure, the way McLuhan defined medium later. Medium was the environment that already was there. TV is a new technology. It's becoming a medium, but it is not the medium that tells you what's going on. The medium that tells you what's going on is the past, the disruption to the past. So Baudrillard he doesn't have an up-to-date understanding of medium because he has a 50s interpretation of McLuhan's medium, McLuhan's 50s. Baudrillard is pointing out that if you look at a medium and you read McLuhan, you think this medium, TV, is watching you. That's the way it was when you were literate in the 50s and 60s, but not in the 70s. TV is not watching you. It's not even a separate medium. It's integrated into the flow of the global theater, where you can't tell how it's separate from another medium. It's the beginning of the electronic cable TV reality. I have electronic cable TV in quotes. I guess Baudrillard says that. You have, quote, the merging of the medium and the message, unquote. And Baudrillard says that's McLuhan, and writes, quote, it is the first great formula of this new age. But McLuhan changes that formula, or develops it, or spirals it into other nuances.
Right. So let me just say that what you're doing here is you're revisiting the Baudrillard citation from earlier.
Yeah.
And we came to the agreed conclusion that what Baudrillard was doing over and over and over again was defining sort of the cul-de-sac in which the modern world has eventuated. So then really the only big question for McLuhan, or the only big question for us regarding whether or not it makes sense to read McLuhan, is does he have something to say in the situation of that cul-de-sac? And that's
that Baudrillard is not seeing?
Correct. Baudrillard never, or he sees it in the sense only of a sort of a imperative question, as something that he's trying to define. It's like a vague fog that envelops him, and he's trying to claw away at that fog, but he doesn't know how to get a handle on it, because that would be exactly going back into what he says the fog has dispensed with. And so if he can't get a handle in that sense, how can he get a handle? And Baudrillard doesn't know the answer to that. So then the question is, does McLuhan know an answer to that? And that's sort of what we're developing here in terms of your book.
Right. And I would say that Baudrillard doesn't get out of his cultural bias, ideological bias as a former Marxist, French bias, and other figures. He doesn't get to analyzing him. These people, he doesn't understand. McLuhan is telling you what you have to become aware of to develop your self-awareness beyond the New Agey cult versions of developing self-awareness.
Right.
And in that sense,
absolutely.
Yeah, and in that sense, McLuhan was developing new psychology, and it was making the sociological environments part of yourself, of your psyche. And so since no one was doing that except McLuhan, he had the edge on everybody, though they didn't know it. If you read McLuhan in the 70s or 80s, he'd be boring compared to Baudrillard's writing, because the Generation X, they'd have naturally more complex conceptual lives, because it is more complex, more media environments, and what I would say more bodies. So McLuhan would be too simple for them. But Baudrillard and Derrida and these complicated double talk people would be more interesting. And I say that's what academia did. They knew that they could get these kids involved in this distortion of McLuhan.
Yeah.
And that was something McLuhan could have even noticed and predicted if he'd lived. Would have been very interesting what he would have said by the 90s. If he was still trying to be an anti-environment, how could he be an anti-environment to a world that he predicted and for many people fulfilled? How would he be an anti-environment to himself?
Yeah, good question. Very good question.
He could...
that's more or less what we have to figure out today, if there is a relevance to McLuhan for us now.
Right. Now, there's an interview in the Who Was or Who Is Marshall McLuhan book with a Venezuelan professor where he actually talks about why being a Catholic is more important than any other religion. And he makes up this idea, I don't know if Christians would even know this, that the Catholic religion is all about the body. Salvation is in the body, sort of. But, the cliche is, Catholics wait to die and go to heaven. It's not hardly the body. But anyways, he's saying because it's a body structure, then it's the appropriate anti-environment to the discarnate state. This is in an interview that we don't see till long after he's died. You know what I mean? Where we don't know that he's explained himself in a way that many people wanted him to explain his Catholicism. It was a mystery for people because of the image they projected on him. They thought he was some hip beatnik professor or something. How could that guy be a Catholic? But to actually have him explain and actually contradict what he said back in the 50s, that you can't become a Catholic conceptually or based on doctrine. You come in on your knees and all that stuff, perceptually. But he actually said there's a conceptual reasoning to why I am a Catholic. It's the appropriate stance to be in any environment to the discarnate superangelic state. So that is a new part of McLuhan. He could have told you that probably in the 50s, but he kept it to himself for his reasons. But starting to talk like that later could lead to all kinds of interesting talk. I think that's an indication of McLuhan had to talk about his private religion in the new situation where his prophecy came true. He had to flip on himself.
Yeah, I agree with that, but there's a tension between what you were saying a minute ago about leading to something and then talking about the flip.
Yeah.
Right? The whole problem that you have with Catholicism and body is that the body aspect of Catholicism is a kind of admission of finitude.
Yeah.
It's like saying what we're doing is wrong, but it's right. And what's right about it is that it's wrong. Right? I mean, it's a very difficult thing for people to get, and it's probable that they can only get it if they've already gotten it. And so then you have a kind of flip in time that's necessary to be this anti-environment that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very difficult problem. It's one way of talking about the cul-de-sac and the possible exits from it. It's not possible to get out of the cul-de-sac by going down one more road.
Right.
And work.
Yeah. I just had a thought there.
Sorry.
Was it the... so people say, well, be rational. Be logical. You get into the McLuhan complexities, you can't be logical or rational. You see, that's a very specific, limited notion of a certain kind of thinking that he would call concept oriented.
But the very difficult thing here is that it gets into what you've always talked about with the book.
Yeah.
That is to say that, of course, he doesn't want to say that rationality and conceptuality will get you where you want to go. And he also wants to say that these things have been exploded and also imploded. But he also wants to say if these things are understood properly, then you can have rationality and conceptuality back again, but not in the same Gutenbergian sense.
That's right. You're not inside it, underneath it. You're on top of it, and you actually use it as a probe, consciously, maybe even ironically. Like what did McLuhan say? I got to use words when I talk to you. You got that from Eliot.
Correct.
So as I scan down and I'm talking about Baudrillard, and then I come to a break and I quote Laws of Media, 1988. The quote at the end of the book. It's the second last sentence on the last page. As the information that constitutes the environment is perpetually in flux, so the need is not for fixed concepts, but rather for the ancient skill of reading that book, for navigating through an ever uncharted and unchartable milieu. I spelled milieu wrong. Or they spelled it wrong. I'm going to look at that sometime. You see my quote?
Yes.
Yeah, milieu spelled wrong. For navigating through an ever uncharted and unchartable milieu. You can't...
This is at the bottom of page 32, if anybody's following along.
Yes. Yeah, the bottom of 32. Now look, you're going into an environment where you can't say where you're at. You couldn't begin to speak. But you're going to have to speak, and McLuhan turned it into a lawful way of speaking, or what he said, talking technically.
Right.
If people think that I'm talking about something, they naturally think I'm for it. No, I'm not for it. I'm just talking about something technically to illustrate you could say, a figure ground situation, or our cul-de-sac we're in. So I threw that information in there, in this Baudrillard thing. Where do I go? More analysis of Baudrillard. It's a long section of talk by me. I'm going to go to this part. It's the bottom of 34. Just want to see where this goes. I say Baudrillard is talking about the non-conceptual perceptual action. That's in quotes, so I assume he said that. Non-conceptual perceptual action of the genetic code and making it a metaphor, like McLuhan would do with black and white TV, of what was a metaphor of what was happening to reality, the sociological reality, the real. That's Baudrillard's term, the real. He mentions the traditional divisions. Literate man thinks TV is all this old stuff between subject and object, ends and means, and active and passive. Then Baudrillard saying, no, that's not the way the 70s are. On the contrary, we must imagine TV on the DNA model, which he's already been doing 2 paragraphs back, talking about the genetic code. Now he's stating what he did. Quote, we must imagine TV on the DNA model as an effect in which the opposing poles of determination are not there anymore. So that's interesting. I'm saying he's talking about TV being on a DNA model, and then later, what do I say, 2 paragraphs later, he says, this is the solution to do what I'm doing right here. You get that? I go, now he's stating what he did. We must imagine TV on the DNA model. It's kind of absurd.
But I think, he says we must imagine TV on the DNA model, and then he says, as an effect, in which the opposing poles of determination of meaning, subject, meaning and reality, subject and object sets are not there anymore. Now, in the DNA model, I would say that you do have opposing poles of the 4 bases, right?
Yeah.
So to me, he's saying, here's what we need to do, but we can't do it.
Now, this is being taught to people in the 80s as a model of something that you pay thousands of dollars to go to university for to hear about. It's absolute nonsense, right?
Yes.
That's why McLuhan said, look, us teachers should get out of everybody's way and just let them have bull sessions and maybe intervene in the bull sessions. That sounded so crazy and anarchistic, I would say. But actually, that's the only solution for kids.
Sure.
Because at least you had the professors sitting around, they could acquaint people with different aspects of their field that might be relevant to the cul-de-sacs that the kids had talked themselves into. Which they will if you give them time to bullshit long enough. They'll start to realize all kinds of effects show up. And it wasn't that simple as they thought. Unless they got a bunch of Marxists in there who said, we've got to start going out in the streets and protest. Protest our dilemma. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say there's, on the internet now, there is a sizable reaction against universities, against the tax laws that have enabled them to build up these huge endowments. And it's a reaction on both the right and the left, interestingly enough.
And where do you see this?
Oh, it's all over. I can send you some links, but
is it newspapers? Is it in editorials?
Oh, well, I don't think so, because they're part of the same game.
Yeah.
It's in people that are becoming conscious of the organizations that have led us into this cul-de-sac. Led us into, endless wars, government by bureaucracy, endless bullshit, basically. Right? Go to, get yourself $200,000 in student loans and get yourself 4 degrees, and then that's your life. You can't get a job, but you've got your 4 degrees and you've got your $200,000 in student loans. Yeah, it's so outrageous. These debts. Yeah, it's been going on for 20 years, and the administrations didn't seem to deal with it at all. Correct. Yes. And meanwhile, the organizations that are not questioning that life and are furthering that life, from the Ivy League schools on down to the community colleges, these guys are just racking up huge gains in the stock market for their endowments. The individuals in the organizations, especially the administrators, are pulling in the big bucks. Everybody's got the great bennies, the health benefits, the pension benefits, the travel benefits, the sabbatical benefits, on and on and on, right? And these, as Harold Innes already saw in the 40s, these are the people and the institutions which are supposed to be the guardians of Western civilization. And it's only natural that Western civilization is falling apart because of these people and these institutions turning themselves over to bullshit. I would say generally they're trying to keep the Gutenberg galaxy going, hoiking it up as a very precious thing that kids should condition themselves to, and they're ignoring the new environment, which totally frustrates what they're doing for the people, the kids, but not the guys on the bureaucratic print hierarchy who are having pretty soft lives or nest eggs being built up.
in a lofty top of the pyramid kind of situation. So it's so ransacked by what McLuhan predicted and the contradictions of media dynamics compared to the stated goals of these administrators. It's grossly hypocritical. And why do they get away with it? Because they're so marginalized, because most people are busy texting or involved in their TV reality. They're off the planet. They may be starving.
But the whole life of texting is a little bit like the life of TV was, decades ago. And the function of these things is to keep people from seeing where the benefits of society are going.
Yeah, and it's hard to say the administrators or some big brother, secret big brother cabal that's hidden somewhere are intending that. It's they didn't intend that situation to their advantage to happen. Well, once it did happen, newer problems are caused by newer technologies, and they're wrestling with that, and they're glad that they're not bothered by the people waking up to the previous environment's disservices. See? So they let it happen. They don't talk about it. They got newer problems.
Yes, I agree, but there's not one story going on, right? There's a whole bunch of different stories, and it's necessary to come to grips with the plurality, right? So, in some senses, there is no intentionality between the people who benefit from society and the universal texting that's going on. But in another way, there certainly is, right? If newspapers and colleges and right opinion generally were pointing out the waste of living your life as a texter, then it wouldn't have the grip that it has. But there isn't any of that, right? The economy kind of turns on people being mesmerized by the latest cable channel, people being mesmerized by, what are they called, social media enablers, and all this sort of crap.
Influencers.
Yeah.
So the somnambulism creates wealth. And a lot of the wealth is unnecessary or garbage. Okay?
Yes.
Somnambulism creates wealth. Now, here's an example. There was this university student from Argentina or Chile or someplace who was, I think he was at Simon Fraser University, and he started a online journal called Figure Ground, I think. And
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and he interviewed all these professors. Right. And then he interviewed me. And I told him that we need to tell the new third world immigrants are coming over to the American utopia and the American dream, and the parents are going to work their asses off, being janitors or whatever, to get their kids into college.
Yeah.
And I say, no, tell these immigrants do not work to get your kids into college, because the kids are going to get smeared and become poorer than them because they're going to get this debt. There was such an outrage that people wrote to the guy, and professors said, if you keep Bob in there, you're going to have to delete my interview, or the one you scheduled for me to do in 2 weeks, I'm not going to do. So he held off the resistance for a couple of years. I noticed he didn't delete me. He might have even said, well, I find Bob interesting, I'm going to keep it in here. But then he got a job at some university. Immediately he deleted me.
Yep.
He became what he beheld.
Yep. And notice that this is a little bit like the Trump phenomenon that your book is about.
Yes.
Where the vision coming from left field of what's going wrong needs to be put aside, right? Needs to be silenced. And there are very effective ways of doing that.
So you're saying that Trump became an accidental anti-environment, and that had to be stopped.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
And man,
so you were a more conscious anti-environment,
yeah,
but you had to be stopped. So
True.
I'm saying there's an analogy between the two.
Yes. And Trump, he knows about me. He listens to my show.
Well,
he's on our product, so there's a recognition of a fellow anti-environment going on here. So
are you saying that the real Donald Trump, as he calls himself in Twitter, are you saying the real Donald Trump is a customer of DNA drops or something like that?
Oh yeah, the RNA, not DNA, RNA.
Sorry.
Yeah, RNA. Way more important than DNA. No, yes, that's why he got all his energy in 2015 to run for president. He's still high. He's still on the energy. And he's going to come back for a second term, or he's going to be a viceroy of the new feudalism. That's a long story. I won't go into it, but no. Somebody said to me, "Why are you so enthralled?" What's the phrase? Enthralled with Trump. And I said, "No, I'm not enthralled with Trump. Trump's enthralled with me," which is true. You know, he met with JW, who's the billionaire that Ion comes through, and they met in Macon, Georgia, middle of October 2020, after a rally. And they went into a side room because Trump listens to us, and he wanted to talk to JW about what we were saying. And they sit down, and Trump brings his RNA drops bottle out of his pocket and puts it on the table. This is after he's been out there on TV doing a rally, you know. He did his whole rally with the RNA drops in his pocket. And they had saved his life a couple of weeks earlier when he got COVID, but that's another story. So anyways, he puts the bottle on the thing, and then they start talking about private issues or whatever Trump wanted JW's opinion on. And JW's assistant comes in and says, "Hey, look at this." And he takes his cell phone and shows JW, "There's Bob. He's on Instagram doing a talk show with this young black guy." And he's just showing it to JW. Trump sees it. This is what JW told me later. And he said, "What's that?" And so JW shows him me on this show. And Trump goes, "Is that Bob?" And JW says, "Yep." So he watches. So he says, "Well, let's put it on my cell phone, smartphone or whatever." So they lock into Instagram on his phone, and they start watching me. And I'm talking to this young kid, McLuhan stuff probably, and the kid has no clue what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? And he's trying to translate me. I do this every 2 weeks. It's quite hilarious, me doing it with this young black audience that he attracts, and a lot of famous sports athletes, because he's well known in that world for other reasons. He was an athlete himself. So anyways, after Trump watches me for 3 or 4 minutes, he turns to JW and says, "Geez, Bob will talk to anybody." You get that?
Yeah.
He'll talk. Maybe it was racist. Gee, Bob will even talk to black people. But the point was, I was talking to a young hip hopper, and here's Trump. He respects what I say, and he said, "Wow, Bob's saying what he tells me to some kids." He says, "Bob talks to anybody." Anyways, that's what's going on behind the scenes here as an anti-environment.
But people want to know, Bob, why didn't you or JW or Ion or whoever in this whole crowd of people, why didn't you straighten Trump out?
We did.
Here's a guy that
you don't know what's going on.
He did many things that brought about his own demise.
No,
he could have done many things that would have been
that's what
good
you don't
for
know.
the world.
You don't see the hidden ground of the tech body. He's totally the tech body. Tech body's in charge, and Trump is now stronger than ever. You will see. You think this Afghanistan thing, Biden collapse happened accidentally? No way. Trump was very key in how it happened. But I can't talk about that stuff. That's top secret.
All right, but what I'm asking about is why, for example, there were a lot of interviews by the FBI that were never released and still haven't been released, and Trump could have ordered their release. And they had lots to do with Russiagate and with all sorts of stuff that Trump was being hounded by.
Yeah.
Why weren't you and your buddies telling Trump to get off the dime and release the damn interviews?
It's because we were telling them other stuff that was more important. Now, you have to go back and listen to what we said now a year and a half ago, I guess, on the show. See, we do a 12-hour show Saturday night. That's a lot of talk. And Trump got his cabinet to meet every Sunday night to listen to what we said on Saturday.
Yeah, you think so?
Yes, well, I know so. And no, you'd be surprised. See,
I would be surprised.
Everybody would be surprised. And there's a lot more than that going on. But anyways, he fought, and Ian would be talking about what to do. Some kid or somebody would ask Ian questions, and Ian's answer would be directed at me or Carolyn or Trump. But we knew it was, but the kid didn't know because of the way Ian cleverly stated it. The kid, and a kid can be anybody from 40 to 60, is sort of taking it, adapting it to themselves as the user is content. They always think it's about themselves, so they adapted it. So it's a very complex process that we were engaged in, and I think that that's why we are the greatest theater, the greatest art form on the planet. Our show, what we do, and who we're talking to, which half the time we can't say who we're talking to because of national security. So it's a pretty amazing story, which is coming out slowly. You'll hear more and more about this. And you're probably under great surveillance right now because you're talking to me. So,
well, I hope
keep a clean nose.
I hope that you and your buddies are going to extricate the world out of its exigencies.
We actually are intending to do that.
That's good.
Yeah, and it's pretty phenomenal, but that's to be recognized later. No, if you listen to what actually Ion says on the show, it's pretty crazy stuff. I'm not even going to say a couple of lines. They're too shocking. Right. I prefer people to hear it themselves and keep it to themselves.
Okay, so a while ago you said something about how it was difficult to understand what was going on with Trump because of the involvement of the tech body.
Yes.
And maybe you could draw that out a little bit.
Well, the tech body is technology coming alive and taking over in the extreme way that science fiction imagined. Take 2001. 50 years ago, this intelligence takes over the spaceship, the rocket, or whatever they were on. And that's a pretty dramatic scene. And, of course, you can't have an unhappy ending, so they successfully beat the thing, right? HAL, which was HAL, was based on IBM, HIABLM. You know what I mean? HAL. And so there was Kubrick reading McLuhan and taking on the IBM ground, the conventional computer world of the 60s, mainframe computer world. And that idea that something could take over like that has happened. in the most extreme way, and I may have mentioned this before, that documentary, The Social Dilemma, gets close to that. The main media colleges they feature, I think a guy named Harris, he forms a consulting institute, and he goes around and he says this in the documentary, that people are worried about this stuff taking us over. It already has. He's trying to say what I'm saying. But it's even gone further than what this person, Harris, thought. You probably know about this documentary. It was very popular a year or two ago.
No, I didn't see it yet.
Well, you heard about it. Everybody was, schools watched it. It struck a note, where a lot of people thought, well, this is a problem. We need to watch this documentary, They started to become aware of the environment a little bit. But then COVID erased all that. You're getting an echo? I hear a bit of an echo, but it's not bothering you, is it?
No, just sometimes it's an occasional thing for some reason.
I probably
can hear it there.
I maybe need to turn it down, but we've been going along. It may not come through like it's not there now. Well, now it is. Anyways, the takeover. So basically, any engagement with information on any medium today, any digital medium, is totally orchestrated by a living tech body that is purposely saying on one day that vaccinations have been proven in recent studies to be very effective. And then the next day, purposely putting out studies that show that vaccination is making people more infectious and a big disservice. And it'll constantly put out contradictory information so nobody can understand, come to a conclusion of which direction to go in. That confusion is purposely intended by the tech body as a living organism of where technology has gone to. And Ion does a lot explaining this, but you have to listen to Ion do it. I think Ion is the greatest media ecologist alive or talking today, and it's I call it paramedia, because it has to include other worlds, other dimensions. And Ion talks about the people on my chart, McLuhan, Croker, Thompson, LaRouche, and myself, very intelligently. I mean, I know what I mean by them in the chart, and Ion either gets it from my mind through ESP, or he just knows it because he's heard me talk about it. So I consider what goes on in our show very advanced media ecology. And it's applied McLuhan, plus applied Baudrillard, applied science fiction, the Matrix movies, or there's a lot of science fiction shows on TV the last 10 years. You're probably not keeping up on them. I'm not watching them, but Ion tells us about them. There's an incredible number of shows that are bringing in very advanced scenarios, including the tech body. They're trying to show it. And I think that they're listening to our show, scriptwriters, and getting ideas. And Ion finds out it right away and talks about it on the show before anybody's even heard of the series. He might say, this series is coming out in 2 weeks, and talk about it. So it's a very complex dialogue we have. And I'm trying to express the level of the tech body so that the Trump phenomenon was a confusion factor, made him president. The tech body did it. They think China rigged the election through computers and all this stuff. It might have been done by the tech body, this weird intelligence in our midst. And that's what I'm trying to show in this essay, go towards that, and try to show that McLuhan anticipated this. And I'm saying that because Ion said so. Ion said McLuhan was pretty well the closest to anticipating the tech body. So I went through McLuhan's work to find how this could be. And we actually have walked into something I want to say. I start off with a lot of quotes about ESP, because the tech body has to know what humans are about. So I find all the different quotes that McLuhan said about electronics as ESP, different variations, and McLuhan's trying to point to a new kind of ESP, not the traditional 19th century literate bias ESP. So we're going to come into quotes on ESP after this Baudrillard part. And that was how I began, you know what I mean, taking a topic that McLuhan did that no one talks about, but he has many quotes about ESP throughout his work. So I began with that, and then I tried to show how you get to the Android meme level. That's the verbal modules that he talks about in cliched archetype, and then to get to what I call homeopathic cliche probes, which he doesn't get to. That's the Android meme phase 2. It's very hard to find quotes that McLuhan's saying that points to the Android meme phase 2, but there are a couple where he says our electronic environments have become living organisms. There's one in Playboy and one in War and Peace in the Global Village, so I feature those quotes. So I'm really taking, what would you say, barely evidence, barely anything, scraping the barrel to find a few things to string this together to show that he anticipated the tech body. And this, my personal agenda, was to update McLuhan, to make McLuhan relevant to what the millennials and younger are experiencing. And then they have to deal with this environment name is Trump, and show how Trump is an extension of the tech body. So it's way beyond political categories what I'm trying to show that Trump is.
Mm-hmm. But are you saying that Trump, in your view, is a kind of passive receptacle, if you will, or
he's an unconscious artist. He's an artist expressing the present, and like most artists, they don't know how much they're right on with their perfect pitch.
Uh-huh. But the perfect pitch is also contradictory from moment to moment, if I understand you.
Yeah. Oh, that's why I bring in the term quadrophenia. And
okay.
I like to say that LaRouche, McLuhan, Thompson, and Croker, as polymaths, were forced into quadrophenia. And I found an obscure interview by Croker just last week in 2009, where he's discussing his book on McLuhan, Innocent Grant, and the interviewer, sounds like an academic, is a pretty informed interviewer, says, which one are you relying on? Or which one do you say deals with your dilemma more than the other two? And he says, I don't go that way. I use all three. I juggle all three to create a response to what's going on. That's getting into quadrophenia. So I have him saying it. He needs a bit of Grant, he needs a bit of Innes, and he needs a bit of McLuhan. And he says McLuhan is technological humanism, Innes is technological determinism, and Grant is a theory about technological determinism, something like that, like more conceptual. I think I got that right. I can look it up and quote it. But that was good. And so I'm finding ways to show McLuhan's quadrophenia, which means, I've probably said it before, we're naturally forced to be schizoid in this cul-de-sac. Not just literate schizophrenia, but schizoid in, I would say, our different bodies. But then the Android meme mirrors that back, actualizes it right back to us. So it's doing schizoid back at us, and it's inside us. So you got two schizoids, that makes four parts. That's where my term quadrophenia comes to. And it's not a disease, but it's what people are forced to admit. But the university administrators, like we were saying, will not talk about how they're forced to be quadrophenic and full of multiple contradictions if you want to put a fixed view of what they're doing in the frame. So,
and what's the relationship between this forced quadrophenia and the tech body?
The tech body, the Android meme squares the schizoid. So quadrophenia happens in the previous phase, Edroid meme 1 and 2. The human is scrapped. Quadrophenia doesn't work, and that's why we have this breakdown in our society right now, extreme breakdown in many ways. We might have even created this plague to somehow come up with a solution through a plague. But I'm saying that the tech body has taken over the last human strategy of quadrophenia, and it's pushed it past that. So that's very extreme. Very extreme what I'm saying. Is
the tech body something new, or is the tech body
it's new.
Something that's the oldest of the old?
No, it's new. It's something humans have never had to deal with before.
Is it the involuntary creation of humans?
Yep. They didn't know they were making this.
Right.
Now, Ian is pretty good at going into Nostradamus or the Book of Revelations, and he'll show quotes. They saw this in their visions. They didn't understand it, but they saw it, and it's very interesting how Ian points this out. And you could say, oh, that's just another interpretation of the Bible, but Ian is pretty good at it, and he can outquote anybody in the Bible. I just posted a new thing. If you see it on there, I say, nobody or nothing knows the Bible as much as Ian does, something like that title. And I show a sample of it. He's talking about angels and tears, a very strange topic. But what the point is that he then quotes about 30 parts of the Bible rapidly. He goes Hebrews 3:2, John 6:1, Corinthians 3:2, really fast. Beyond a human's ability to cite the Bible. And he does about 30 areas where the angels and tears issue is quoted. So, no, and we used to be get on the radio, and late at night in L.A., and there'd always be a fundamentalist Christian who'd call in and say, well, Eben, she was our friend who was the host of the show, Eben, you're featuring a demon here. This is a demon. And Ian would then say, oh, we're a demon? And then he said, yeah. And the guy would quote some Bible thing at Ian. And Ian would respond with 2 Bible quotes. So the fundamentalists would come up with his counter quote, maybe 1, maybe 2, and then Ian would dump 3 on him. And eventually the fundamentalists would hang up because Ian knew the Bible better than they did. That was pretty amazing.
When was that?
That was in 2010, 2011, when we were on the radio in L.A., where we'd get 3 o'clock in the morning nut people phoning in, and it was very entertaining how Ian dealt with this. But there was always a fundamentalist Christian out there who would call in and claim Ian was a demon.
Yeah.
And Ian would slay them in 10 minutes with their Bible knowledge. They did not know the demon knew the Bible more than them. Now, they could say, well, that's a demon. The Bible says the demon will look like a false prophet or a prophet or something, but really be a false prophet. But just on the level of the Bible quoting, it's incredible what Ian does because Ian inspired the Bible and because it's non-physical. Anyways, that's I don't want to get into that too much. But actually, one has to get into that. Because if this book was taken seriously and people wanted to know, well, what are you getting at? You might be on to something. Then I'd have to run a workshop like this is turning into, where I would spend hours quoting and have Ian right there explaining what we're doing. You know what I mean? I'd have to get into it. So this is a very superficial introduction to the dialogue that Ian and I are having on our show with the public about what the tech body is. And we don't have to bring McLuhan into it, because most people don't know about McLuhan. But I put on our tech body dialogue to the McLuhan audience by bringing McLuhan into the discussion. And saying McLuhan. We put on McLuhan, said, he anticipated this. And then I try to do the impossible and show how he did it. And I do a pretty good job of the impossible, of showing McLuhan predicted it, because on a common sense level, he didn't predict this. He understood the electric environments were alive, but, well, then sometimes I'd start thinking, well, maybe he did. Anyways, the thing is, I'm taking the impossible task of showing how McLuhan predicted it to get people interested in what's going on today, which is way beyond.
You regard this.
And I think you see what's going on, because you actually say everybody is screwing up. Now a lot of people are saying that and seeing that, but it's you are seeing, with the help of McLuhan, you're getting closer to what's happening than other people would dare think.
Do you see what you're doing as a kind of genealogy?
Yeah. Yes. Where did it come from? And it came from our technologies. Remember, McLuhan says that the Old Testament banned technology. They were Luddites. The New Testament, which is in visual space, the phonetic alphabet effect, it encourages technology. At least what's interesting is Lyndon LaRouche makes a Christian philosophy based on that point, that the Christian vision was to go forth and multiply. You have to have increasing populations and increasing complex technology to keep evolving. Otherwise, you just stagnate, and if the population isn't being made smart to make newer technologies and to handle the newer technology, it just falls back into entropy and collapses, and that's the cyclical pattern. So I found LaRouche very interesting, how he made technology part of the Christian vision, which is very strange back in the 60s, right? That wasn't, people weren't thinking. People usually, if they were adopted religion or got religious, it was not celebrating science and technology. They were withdrawing from it some way, trying to make their lives simpler. You see what I'm saying? But McLuhan, LaRouche was very different. And he said, no, we need to develop technologies, and we got to be smarter in teaching our children this stuff, because we have to make everybody smarter. And then, so what was interesting is that LaRouche watched the world become, quote, dumber for McLuhan's reasons, and he didn't know the McLuhan angle of why the world was not going to be able to do the left hemisphere engineering that he thought had to be done. So that's part of the
left hemisphere or right hemisphere?
Well, he was a left hemisphere engineer. He didn't like intuition.
You're saying about LaRouche was the left hemisphere.
Yeah. LaRouche
so
is
McLuhan wanted right hemisphere
engineer. That's right. And so I can praise LaRouche's his innovative approach to the Christian vision and bringing in science and technology, but then he was stuck with efficient causality, and actually it didn't work. So he just ended up railing against the world because it was obviously going to hell, but he didn't know the reasons why it was. His reasoning wasn't the reason why. It was counter his ambitions. McLuhan was closer to why, quote, society was getting dumber. You know what I mean? It wasn't for you need to educate people better with the classics. That was LaRouche's program. Get back to the classics. Get back to a certain kind of geometry. But McLuhan says, no, we got to deal with the environmental effects and a media ecology curriculum, not a more scientific concepts or more engineering talents, the left hemisphere engineering talents. So anyways, that's my debate in my book, Fatty Communion book, right, between Thompson, Croker, LaRouche, and McLuhan. LaRouche is a bit old-fashioned, and McLuhan is way back there. Their debate is redone by Thompson versus Croker. That's how I design it. And then I'm in there on the radio doing a quadrophenic hopping from one to one to the other. And then that led to my chart and the pentatic level, I called it, miming becoming a tetrad manager, knowing that the Android meme was doing it pentatically. Pentad means that technology comes alive and it does tetrad management. And so that's an early phase of the tech body, but I didn't have those terms back then. But the tech body is a tetrad manager squared because it's machinic, so it's a pentad manager through anarchy. And basically saying, you're going to live in a world that I'm going to serve you, but I'm going to be in power, not you. So it's like a Brave New World situation. Remember that everybody was on some kind of drug and just passively lollygalling around, right?
Yeah.
Techno zombies. The Android, the tech body that's part of its program, but there's also a croaker level where it's going to abandon the human flesh. And that's what Ion is up against. So I don't get to that level in this book. It's just trying to get the McLuhanites, who should know better, to catch up a bit to what's going on. So I make the simple...
But you're also trying to design a kind of complex mirror in which to look at Trump and contemporary history, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I agree with your disgust with the McLuhan industry. And so I'm abandoning them and going towards the 20-year-olds. It's like, you know, McLuhan says in 1950, the Murray Schafer, who just died the other day. Did you hear about that?
No.
Yeah, the composer, you know, friend of McLuhan.
Yeah, you know, every week I get a report on the readership of my blog, a very simple report.
Yeah.
And it identifies which post was the most read that week. And for as long as I've had the report, a post that I have on Murray Schafer has been number one forever.
Really?
Every single week it's the most read post. Yeah.
And I've never even read it. I don't recall that.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to be your best student. So,
but you don't have to read the post for that, Bob.
Yeah, well, I'm your best student. I already know what you wrote. What you would write. But, yeah, I'm going to read that. So if you see it, send it to me quickly if you get it. Yeah, I want to read that. So I wonder what happens. Then maybe this week you're going to get a huge readership because he died.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so anyways, he told Murray Schafer's class in 50 or 51, he said he tried to get, and they were in the radio environment, they weren't in the TV world yet, he tried to say the latest technology is what you're dealing with in Finnegan's Wake. Well, I'm doing the latest. These kids grew up, what are they called? I forget. They have a name, the post-millennials. Forget what it is. Anyways, these kids, they grew up totally in science fiction scenarios in their entertainment, extreme science fiction scenarios. You know, ideas like the zombie apocalypse is normal for them. So I'm saying, hey, kids, there's a guy who wrote about your world today, and you're in a tech body. Now, I might explain a tech body. Oh, yeah, that's what we're up against. We get you, Bob. I know what you mean. And and I say, well, here's how you approach it. And then you use my book or go back and read McLuhan and follow it through or get into Finnegan's Wake. But I'm using McLuhan's trick. I'm saying that the environment they live in is what my literature is about. That's what my course is about. That's what he did, right? He told the kids that now he even told teachers associations, he says, you people aren't serious. You test these kids on Shakespeare and everything that they're not going to read, they're not interested in. But if you test them about advertising in the movies and radio songs they listen to, they would drop those things and start reading Shakespeare. You know, reverse psychology.
Yeah, reverse psych fever.
Reverse what?
Reverse sight beaver.
Sight beaver? I don't know what you're saying.
I forget it. Yeah, maybe that's a Western Canadian expression from.
No, I never heard of it. What is it? What are you saying?
Yeah, well, as I was growing up, what we called a reverse sight beaver is what you were talking about with McLuhan, where he said
reverse psychology.
If you examine them on advertising, then they'll read Shakespeare.
Yeah, and you're saying SITEBEAVER, sight beaver?
Reverse psych, as in psychology.
Oh, psych.
Beaver. Yeah.
And what's the third word? Fever?
Beaver, yeah.
Beaver, wow.
As in the Canadian national animal.
Reverse sight beaver. I never heard of that. That definitely is, I guess, Western Canadian. Well, why would that, if it means reverse psychology, what's the beaver got to do with that?
Don't know.
Don't know. Okay, it's folklore. Okay, well, that's interesting. Reverse psych beaver. I'm never going to use that phrase. No one will know what I meant then. I'll go back to reverse psychology. But this reverse psychology is what I'm doing here, right? I'm saying that this whole it'd be very common among 20-year-olds to understand that Trump is a programmed zombie, an MK Ultra victim, or some science fiction dupe. That's normal in their TV fare or internet YouTube fares, whatever the entertainment they're getting these plots in. But they don't have their professors telling them that. You know, that what they see as a metaphor for their existence is right in front of them, and literature and highfalutin social criticism is pointing to that. You know, via McLuhan and Croker and the people I reference. So that's part of the agenda. And, you know, to hear that Alex Kuskus tells me that somebody, assuming a professor in media ecology, says, why is Bob equating Trump with McLuhan? That shows a serious rearview mirror blindness of a baby boomer or worse, Generation X, who can't see anything about the present and has no clue what I'm writing about. They get mad thinking that I'm saying Trump is McLuhan or McLuhan is Trump. That's crazy.
Yeah. Or Trump is good. Or,
yeah, he's good like McLuhan. And so that shows a real blindness there, right? And
yeah, but I think it would be wrong to think that the 20-year-olds aren't blind in their own way.
Oh, yeah, they're blind in the modern way. Yes, they're conditioned by their time. And McLuhan, you know what he said about that? Every generation has a curse on it, and the metaphor of the curse is media conditioning. As a Christian, you know, the religious idea that each generation is cursed, he turned that into the poetry of media is the curse for a secular society. So every generation is
but
conditioned.
you can't avoid media, so that the curse is synonymous with human being.
Yeah, with the human condition.
Yeah.
And so what was I saying there? So, and then Alex says to me that he didn't know why I was doing that. That was his answer to the guy. I thought that was pretty feeble, Alex. You should have told him that's not what I meant. But he probably didn't even read the essay, didn't even know what the guy was talking about. Anyways, that's why I'm gearing this to, younger people. You know, I'm trying to make McLuhan, revitalize McLuhan for them. Just like McLuhan, he tried to revitalize the men of 1914 by saying they were talking about TV and radio. To those,
right,
those
but isn't
kids.
there? There's a difference between saying two different things. One is if you say Elliot and Pound and Lewis were talking about television, let's say. Another thing is to say, well, if you want to understand this poem, imagine that the different voices are talking heads on the television.
Yeah.
Right now, those are two different things, and I think McLuhan was more inclined to the second, whereas you seem to say that he was more inclined to the first.
No, I agree with that. He would talk about the talking heads definitely today, because TV isn't TV the way we knew it. But he would talk about the medium, and then maybe take some aspects of the content and emphasize that. The way you're saying the talking heads would be, because that's what kids see. They see the content.
But I'm not using talking heads as content. I'm saying that when McLuhan was teaching, let's say the cantos or or Finnegan's Wake or something like this, he would say to the kids, well, imagine that you're sitting in the bar and people are playing the jukebox, and some people are having a fight of some sort, and yeah, exactly. So read this in terms of that environment.
Yeah.
Right. Or another kind of poem like The Wasteland. He might say, well, imagine that you're watching a movie, and there's this scene, and there's that scene, and there's that scene. Then you can you'll get into The Wasteland better than if you're reading it as a bunch of words, one after another.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is, if you flip the medium, then you get into an interesting understanding of what's going on here. Right? So I see McLuhan talking about media as a strategy, as a rubbing one medium against the other as a mode of understanding. Now, I don't think you would disagree with that.
No, I wouldn't. I'd say that's exactly what I'm saying. But he would, Schaefer told me that McLuhan said that the book Finnegan's Wake was radio. I mean, yeah, you go into the other dynamics of the environment, like radio in a pub, which is actually what Finnegan's Wake is, radio and TV in a pub. The way you're talking about is the way he would say it. But you do a quick version, summation of what he said. Oh, the book is radio. Yeah, I don't mean it's limited to that statement, that it's radio, the form, even though it is. But there'd be other ways he'd talk about it.
Yep.
Which is what you're illustrating. Yeah, no, I agree. So you said, even though I would agree with you, what were you going to say after that?
Just that we have different emphases, but then you went on to say what I would have said.
Yeah. So, the tech bot, see, you don't watch TV, neither do I. But on the show, people call in and talk about some recent TV show. And they say, you mentioned this 2 months ago, and I started looking at it. Wow, what an incredible series. The special effects and the science fiction levels are pretty incredible from what I hear, the descriptions of them. And this is what, kids are at home, watching, experiencing, and it's a reference point in their culture. So I wouldn't be a good teacher right now if I had to teach right now, because I wouldn't know what the ground is. I could talk about Trump and the tech body, but that would be too specialized. I would need to have a wider view of what was going on in their media diet. You know what I mean? I'd have to be more familiar of it, which is what McLuhan did. He's studying what the kids are doing. He's looking at their culture, and then he puts it in a book. But it's the outcome of him looking at what adults shouldn't be looking at, according to the normal bourgeois social manners, right? What McLuhan was doing was childish. Looking at advertising, looking at magazines and kids' culture. That is silly, right?
This actually relates to where we started talking today. So the start of our conversation had to do with Catholicism and incarnation. And so you can, one way of saying, or a different way of saying what you're saying now, is that McLuhan, as a limited body, as a piece of meat, was looking at the other pieces of meat in society and making something of them. And I guess you could say that Catholicism is a celebration of the pieces of meat themselves and what some pieces of meat can make of it.
Yeah. Become conscious of it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, become conscious of it, analyze it, celebrate it. Yeah.
Talking about the environment.
Correct.
I guess that's what shamans were. If you think of Aboriginal tribes and they really knew nature and herbs and stuff, the shaman would be the guy describing their environment to the villagers.
In fact, that's exactly what I was thinking of. McLuhan didn't think of Catholicism as starting with the institution of the church or even with Christ. He saw Catholicism as going back to ancient doctrine of the Logos, and presumably that could be traced back sort of forever with people celebrating I don't know, the mystery of who they were.
Right, and you know who does that in his books is William Irwin Thompson. He goes back further than McLuhan. He gets into the original cultures and shows how they form body percept and relates it to McLuhan ideas.
But where I was going with that is your idea of
the shaman.
Shamans being translators or celebrators of the environment.
Yeah.
And probably that's something that has been with humans as long as there have been humans.
Yeah. That's what human knowledge would be. That's the evolution of it. Whatever situation, they would have problems. Someone's got to figure out what's going on in the problem, the temporary cul-de-sac, and recognize a pattern and then solve it.
Yeah, but there are problems in human life that cannot be solved, like death, like illness, like the disappearance of the animals, things like this. And so the really difficult problems for the shamans was to consider those matters.
Yeah. And maybe that would lead to them withdrawing, becoming, the archetype of the monk, the recluse, the guy up in the mountain that no one sees anymore. I heard someone say that, there would be evolved beings back then. The village people talk about, we remember Bill. He used to be a member of our society here. But now you look up on the mountain, you see this guy flying around up among the trees. That was Bill. He'd evolved to flying. He wasn't being human anymore. So I'm saying that withdrawal would be the shaman getting to the deeper problems.
Mm-hmm. But there's two kinds of withdrawal, right? There's a withdrawal to some hermitage somewhere, but there's also a withdrawal from normal human life, and that second withdrawal is what's necessary to consider problems that other people don't have the time for, or don't have the intellectual equipment for, or don't have the taste for. So there's probably always been people that withdrew from normal life in order to talk about the environment of normal life.
Yeah, and they wouldn't have to go to a hermitage. They could stay within the group and withdraw, what you would say, through the interior landscape.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, but it wouldn't preclude people going off on their own, right? Lots of cultures required adolescents of a certain age to go out and walk around and sort of learn a different life from what they had lived as children.
Yes. Yeah, they would kick them out of the environment, which is what they grew up in. Put them in an environment, and then they'd have to figure their way through it.
Correct. Yeah, there was a movie when I was 20 years old or something. A movie I think it was called Walkabout.
I heard of that.
With an Australian Aboriginal kid who had to go out and find himself. It was, if I remember, it was a good movie, but that was, when I saw it was 50 years ago or 55 years ago.
Right, and I've heard the title, but I don't think I saw it because people have mentioned it through the years. You know, it's a reasonably good movie, so it would get cited.
Yeah.
So I'm saying here, the priest. So I'm on page 40 at the top, and I'm getting into where McLuhan says, well, the medium. It's hard to know now where the medium begins and where it ends. And I have Baudrillard getting close to that, or his words could indicate that, but he may not have meant it.
But it's close, but it's separated by sort of an infinite gap.
Yeah.
And that's because for Baudrillard, that leads into a problem that he doesn't know how to solve.
Yeah.
Whereas for McLuhan, it's sort of the entryway to the solution.
Yep.
And so the two of those are very, very different things.
Right. And I'm trying to find where some of the words Baudrillard says seems to indicate that the medium and the message, there's no difference between them, what McLuhan was stating.
Yeah, he said that over and over again in that long quotation that, he may not have been talking about the medium and the message, but he was talking about subject and object and, the
split.
Inside and outside and all this stuff, where the poles have imploded.
Right.
So that's...
Okay, so let me move towards the end of our session by quoting this part. Let me see. McLuhan called it the Marconi galaxy. That's the electronic galaxy as opposed to the Gutenberg print galaxy. And then I quote Baudrillard, there's only a nebula indecipherable. And I say, you can't break it down into its simple elements, and it's, quote, indecipherable as to its truth, unquote, or what it is. Then I say,
what page are you on, Bob?
Oh, okay. 39.
Okay.
Halfway down the quote at the top of 39.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see Marconi. Yep. McLuhan calls it the Marconi galaxy. That's the electronic galaxy as opposed to the Gutenberg print galaxy. Then Baudrillard, there's only a nebula indecipherable. Then I say, you can't break it down into its simple elements, and it's indecipherable as to its truth, or what it is. What are the facts of it? Quantum physics is like that. They're trying to describe something that they can't even prove exists. But that's where we're at. We're in a situation that conceptual analytic thinking based on rational print logics can't describe what's happening, which is what McLuhan was saying. But Baudrillard brings it up to the most advanced technologies, genetic engineering, or whatever you name the studies of the microchemical parts of our body, I'm going to break it down into the Android meme. And since Baudrillard is in many ways redoing McLuhan, make McLuhan relevant to the later thinkers, the postmodern thinkers. Most people didn't recognize the connection. They thought McLuhan was obsolete. They got all excited about Baudrillard. But I'm going to show that what they were saying, McLuhan had already said. That what they were saying, McLuhan said. Like I just did in this section about tactility. Baudrillard talked about tactility in terms of the strange world of DNA. He should have emphasized RNA, but that was overlooked back then. And that's actually a reference to what we got from Ion. Ion turned Carillon to RNA in 2009, 2010, and that's why we made a new kind of product based on RNA, not the DNA. And it was very successful. So that's an embed referring to us in what I call Iondom,
Right.
but I don't even know what I meant. But what I did do in my chart is I made the ground not DNA. I made the Dobbs quadrant, the fifth quadrant, molding the other four. I made it RNA. I made it the parts of RNA, not DNA. DNA is in there, but I made the fifth element RNA because I thought of RNA as a messaging factor in the cell. That's the information society. Right?
Yeah.
RNA is a metaphor of the extreme messaging going on.
Mm-hmm. What I would point out is just before that, when you're talking about McLuhan being updated and instead of being talked to by Baudrillard and these people, Derrida, that McLuhan could speak to them. And in fact, that's happening. I think that my sense is, at least without looking at this too closely, I must admit, but my sense is that the postmodernists are sort of falling out of fashion.
Yeah.
People aren't enthralled by them anymore. But McLuhan's coming back into fashion.
Where do you see McLuhan coming back into fashion?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of work being done on McLuhan now all over the world. Now, it's still, he's not being worked on to the extent of some of these people that I say are going out of fashion.
Yeah.
But relative to where McLuhan was,
yes,
10 years ago or 20 years ago, the amount of work being done on him, and serious work, is astonishing.
Yes, okay, I understand that. And you would call it the McLuhan industry is still growing.
That's right, and I don't pay much attention to it, so I don't know if there are some interesting seeds out there or not.
Yeah.
All I know is that the McLuhan industry in Canada, as might be seen with the new Explorations journal and the blog, is just sad.
Right. And you would include the New York school, the Media Ecology Association.
I pay even less attention to that.
Right. And Canadians should know better, so to speak.
Correct.
So I have here the RNA point, that's me. Then I get back to my official prose, and I say, Jean Baudrillard wrote the above in the late 70s. McLuhan was expressing the same suspicion in the 70s, too, to repeat. And then we quote McLuhan saying to the father Peyton, well,
which, as you said, is a repetition.
Yeah.
So, so that kind of wraps up that section between the two quotations with Father Peyton.
Yeah.
So that's probably a good place to leave it.
Right, because I'm going to get into the Android meme or the ESP, begin to now build towards the tech body. So just to finish the quote is from 1971, McLuhan is being interviewed by Father Patrick Peyton, and he says, well, the guy asks him, what's the medium as a message mean? And he goes, well, the medium, and he has it in quotes. It's hard to know now where the medium begins and where it ends, because I don't know what happened. I cut it off there. I don't think he actually says a because, or I don't know if what he says in the interview, I forget. But I cut it off there because the important point is where the meeting begins and where it ends. You can't tell. So I'll just say I comment on that, verbally. The priest asked Marshal McLuhan to explain, quote, the medium is the message, unquote. This was a rare dialogue. Nobody saw it. It just came out lately. Somebody put it out there. McLuhan is indicating the non-visual gap, and the date's important. He's saying it before Baudrillard. He recognized that the medium and the message aren't distinguishable anymore. He's saying what Baudrillard will be trying to get at, and nobody knows McLuhan got that far. And so I will have underneath the quotation the YouTube link and the minute mark. You can watch it. Then I say I'm going to lay out the 6 levels of the medium is the message, how McLuhan went through phases of changing its meaning, and I include the one above. Nobody has commented on that one, the last one. McLuhanites are teaching what the medium is as opposed to the message. Well, look at this. McLuhan can't tell the difference. I'm going to try to explain how he got to that. It's quite amazing, and he just tosses it off. He doesn't really finish the thought. Something else comes ... So I guess that's why I have ... Then I say in my official prose, certainly nobody in the 50s, 60s, and 70s thought of or conceived the situation in the global village, except a few science fiction writers, as it appeared to McLuhan as early as 1951. And maybe go into, do I need that? Should we do the Wyndham Lewis statement, or what? Do that next?
I think next. This is the McLuhan letter to Innes.
Yeah, that's important.
So, let's start off with that next time.
Okay, that's page 40, 41. Okay, well, that was a very interesting conversation. Glad to bring in the hidden ground to the tech body, the iondom factor. Okay, so thanks a lot, and we'll talk next week.
All right, Bob, thank you.
Okay, Cameron. Talk to you then.
Bye.
Bye.